So hello everyone, and welcome to this week's YouTube video where I am answering your questions that I get asked in my S1000D training courses. So this week we are looking at the subject of legacy data. Now, anybody who has done my training courses know that I actually don't like the term legacy data, because legacy implies that, it's dead, it's defunct, we don't really need it anymore. It was served its purpose and it's moved on. That's not the case. We're still talking about data which is valuable. So I like to say, we're talking about data that exists in other formats. So whether that's other structured languages, or whether it's, PDF or paper or whatever it is that we might be looking at migrating to an S1000D environment. So I'm going to just come at this as I would answer it in my training courses, as I have done over the last couple of weeks. And if you have any thoughts about this, please do get in touch with me. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you about this. So when I'm asked the question about legacy file formats, or should we say other existing data, is that first and foremost, I ask, what is it we think we're getting if we are converting it? There has to be a trade-off between the conversion process and actually what we're going to get in return. So, for example, is our objective going out to something like an interactive manual, so that, this is an old legacy format paper-based manual that I converted to S1000D, and we created an IETP very, very quickly with it. So we have to remember that we don't always start from zero. Lots of us are coming into S1000D with existing projects, with existing data sets, with existing technical publications. So we have to look at how and if we are going to migrate that over to S1000D. So the first thing we do is I'll ask the question, what do you think we're getting if we convert? And then I ask, what's the life cycle of the product or project? Is it actually going to deliver any benefit if we do convert this content over to an S1000D environment? And there's lots of different things that I look at when it comes to the technical content itself. But first and foremost, we have to address the commercial or the legal. Do we have the right to convert this data? Are we allowed to convert this data? Do we have to gain authority from somebody else? If we convert this data, do we then supply that S1000D data back to whoever the owner is? These kind of discussions we need to have early doors. I have seen projects where they've gone off down a conversion route and then realized that they actually didn't own the intellectual property and found themselves in a world of pain because they'd converted the content. So we need to make sure that we're allowed to convert this data before we go rushing off and converting it. And then we need to look at, once we've had a discussion around what do we gain and what do we think we're going to get, how easily can we convert this data? Now, let me tell you, this legacy format publication here, when we were converting it, you have to look at, can we identify areas of this manual that actually leans well to S1000D? Can we cleanly identify our module structures? Can we extract any applicability statements from here? Are there tools information in here? Are we going to be backfilling other domains? So are we going to be taking the data that exists in the technical publication and backfilling maybe into a 2000M environment? Are we wanting to take any of this content and backfill it into an ILS environment? So we need to decide if that's going to happen. What's the easiest and simplest method for us to actually convert this content is something that we will do. What you will see a lot with technical publications from, should we say, from older days, ye olde technical publications, is that there's a mix and match of data. Sometimes you'll have some procedural data mixed in with some fault data. You might have some procedural data mixed in with parts data, and So you need to decide if and how you are going to break this down and convert it to S1000D. Do we copy and paste? Do we programmatically OCR and try and programmatically make our life a little bit easier? If we're going from structure to structure, life is a little bit easier for us because there's lots of companies out there that have scripts and tools that will help us convert our content. But other things that we need to be aware of is, what are we going to do with our illustrations? How are we going to take those illustrations? Are we going to just scan them and make them just basic raster images, or are we going to redraw them? Are we going to be putting hotspots in them? Do we want to actually make them interactive for our technical manuals? So when we've looked at all of these particular questions, then we look at what's the most cost-effective way of us actually converting content. Now, it's not uncommon that when I go in to do my S1000D training courses, that the customer will send me some technical manuals and say, here are existing technical manuals. Can you tell us how we can get these to S1000D? Now, we often we'll take a couple of pages and we will convert those to S1000D, show the process that we went through. But are you wanting to do this yourself? Are you going to outsource it to one of the TDW member companies that are listed on our website? If you're looking for somebody who can help you with your data conversion, check out the companies that are on our website. Normally, I would always just point my customers to those that can support them and help, and I've got deep domain experience in how to convert the data. But we have to look for gaps in the data, and we have to look for where there's errors. In this particular technical manual, when we converted it, there were language errors. And therefore, we had to make a decision. Do we copy as is, or do we correct? And there's lots of philosophical discussions about that, because then we have to answer the question, which one becomes the master? And so who is going to look after the master data set, especially if this is an OEM manual and it's come from somebody else, and there may be looking after the technical publication in another source file? Can we gain access to that source file? So there's lots of information that we need before we can actually decide whether it's commercially viable and makes sense for us to convert this content to S1000D. And then we look at how do we apply the principles of S1000D to that technical manual. So where do we break out the DMRL content? Do we take the logical breakdown of this technical publication and make a publication module out of it? Can we identify SNS structures? With this technical manual, for example, we found that rather quickly we just adopted one of the S1000D SNS structures, and we could apply it really, really quickly, really, really easily with a couple of additions. And how did we do that? We used some commercial off-the-shelf templates that we developed for a piece of software. If you've done my training, you'll know what I'm talking about. And we had the ability to map that page-based information to what it would look like in an S1000D environment. So you've got to ask yourself, before we say, should we be converting this to S1000D? Where's the ROI? Where's the actual gain? Are we doing it because we want to adopt technology? And I've seen projects that have just taken PDFs and made an S1000D publication module, referenced PDFs, and put them into an S1000D IETP environment. And that works well for their organization. Now, it's maybe not the most intelligent way for us to be managing and maintaining that data, but because they had OEM data, that was the best way for them to do it. So lots of questions to ask around legacy data. And are there methods for doing it? Yes, there's some great companies that will do this for you. They will take it, own the whole problem. Check out our members list on our website. You'll see the companies that we work with. And, they will take your data and they will certainly give you a preliminary DMRL and say, here is what we think will be the DMRL. This is the SNS breakdown, and then we get into the content itself, cross references, hotspots. Are we going to be, having to manage that? How are we going to convert what's an old paper-based cross-reference and turn that into an S1000D based reference, whether that's internal or external? So there's lots of things that we need to be discussing before we just say, let's do S1000D and let's convert this manual. And there's lots of tips and tricks that I've learned along the way on how we can make our life easier. And we have some tutorials and some presentations on TDW Plus that you can go and have a look at if you're a member, and you can watch those on how we can. I actually did a presentation a couple of years ago on how we converted this technical manual and made it into something that could sit on this Surface Pro. Now, I've deliberately blurred out what it is because I don't want you going and trying to find that. I'm not trying to push this technical manual out there for use. So it's really important that you have a balanced viewpoint of the world, of how and what you're going to do with your legacy formats. So, ask yourself, can we get access to the source files? Can we get access to the source images? Does it make sense for us to convert this to XML? What's the life of our product and project? Is it going to deliver any benefit? Is it because we are actually going to be integrating this data set with another S1000D data set, and we've been told it must be an S1000D? There's lots of ways you can get around that. And, you can say that it's S1000D, but it still remains in its PDF kind of format, if you like. So those are the things that I would be throwing at the students in the room when they start talking to me about the legacy file formats or the legacy manuals or whatever you want to call it. And S1000D says that we need to be making decisions around what we're going to do with this stuff. And of course, if we're just coming from XML to XML or SGML to XML, life's a little bit easier. But when you're coming from an environment like this and trying to convert it to something like the IETP on the Surface Pro here, it can get a little bit more complex. So if you're looking for some help, advice and guidance around converting data, check out our members directory on our website. I'll put a link down below. If you're interested in doing some more of our more in-depth tutorials or want to look at the presentation that I made about converting this manual to structured languages, get in touch. If you want to learn more about how I use commercial off-the-shelf tools to help me make the process a little bit easier converting data, get in touch. So there you go. That's question number 2 done. Thank you to everybody who is sending in and commenting. Most of the comments seem to be happening on LinkedIn, and we're getting some messages into us around some of the thoughts that we are creating. Make sure you like and subscribe to get notified. I think next week, we're talking software. So big contentious issue. We are going to be talking about software. Software always comes up in my training courses. So there you go. That's question number 2 done. How and why and when would we want to be converting our data? What are the kinds of questions you should be asking yourself before you actually go down a conversion process? I'm Michael Ingledew. I'm all about making you successful with your integrated product support strategies. And until next week, see you soon.